Hey guys, my name is Fallen Messiah. Just a quick background about me. I'm a lifelong Diablo fanboy, having played and loved every single Diablo game to date. I spent almost the entirety of my high school days playing Diablo 2, and it's one of my favorite games of all time. On August 13th, 2021, Diablo 2 Resurrected released, an amazing remake of our beloved game, and along with HD graphics, it also came with some much needed quality of life changes, like the auto gold pickup and shared stash tabs. However, because they wanted to remain faithful to the original, there are, in my opinion, quite a few more things that can be improved upon. Now, Diablo 2 fans come in several flavors. You have the purists that just want to keep the game as it is. I am not one of those fans. I love Diablo 2, but it is far from perfect. I think that some people see the game with rose-tinted glasses, which can do more harm than good in the long run, as it prevents growth. I believe that there are ways to address some pain points in the game while keeping the core essence of the game intact. To that end, I will challenge certain mechanics that have been a part of the game for as long as the game existed. So in this video, I will share my top 6 things that will improve the game immensely. Starting with number 1, stamina. We need to talk about stamina. Stamina is the worst mechanic in Diablo 2. Just think about it. A mechanic in an action RPG that limits the action. Nothing remotely similar to stamina has ever existed in a Diablo game before or since Diablo 2. Not in Diablo 1, not in Diablo 3 or Diablo 4. Simply put, it is a completely unnecessary relic that serves no positive purpose in the game and needs to be removed. For those of you who are not familiar, stamina is another stat in Diablo 2 that determines how long you can run. You have a bar, and once it's depleted, you have to wait for it to replenish, or you can walk instead. It is insane that a game like Diablo 2 even has such a thing. What makes it even more absurd is that stamina is a complete afterthought late game. Because it is governed by vitality, and all late game characters have tons of it, it is not really something that concerns characters past a certain stage. Stamina is further made irrelevant by teleport and all the builds that use it. By the beginning of the game, it can be absolutely crippling. In one moment, you're slapping demons back to the burning hells, and in another, your hero has to catch his breath like an old man with arthritis. And yes, you can go to town and chug a bunch of stamina potions, but that's the thing. You shouldn't have to. There are also some abilities and items that interact with stamina which would have to be redesigned in that case. Those stamina potions, for example, want to make them into a potion that gives you fire resistance or lightning resistance. We already have thawing and antidote potions that boost cold and poison res, respectively. Some abilities, like Barbarian's increased stamina, would have to do something else. But because stamina is already trash, increased stamina is also trash, so nothing of value would be lost. Simply put, stamina needs to go away. Number 2 on the list of things that I would like to improve on the game are monster immunities. Now things are about to get a bit controversial. Speaking of bad game mechanics, here's another. A monster that is completely immune to a certain type of damage. Monster immunities have always bothered me in Diablo 2. Why? Well, quite simply, I consider it to be a lazy, bad game design. Diablo 2 is a game that favors character specialization. Yes, you can play as a meteor sorc, for example, but it will never match the damage of a pure lightning or fire sorc. In a game with limited skill points available, it stands to reason that most builds tend to specialize in one type of skill to do the most damage, and most skills only have a single damage type. So, it presents a certain design issue to have a monster completely immune to it. Let's take a Fireball sorceress, for example. A high-level sorceress will easily dispatch Hellbale, the final boss himself. But at the same time, she can't even damage a single Fallen, the shittiest monster in the whole game? How does that make sense? Monster immunity is such a cheap cop-out. It is not a skill-based obstacle. It's an artificial roadblock that's just there, like an invisible wall. And that's what makes it so lazy and ill-designed. And yes, you can break monster immunities with expensive items, but that's another thing that you shouldn't have to do. What baffles me especially is that devs even recognized a part of this entire issue by making sure that no boss in the game is immune to anything, because otherwise you would have builds that wouldn't be able to kill or farm them, because that would be a bad game design. So why do we recognize it's a bad way to design the bosses, but isn't a bad way to design other monsters in the game? Diablo 2 Resurrected tried to solve a part of this issue by introducing Sunder Charms, a more available way to break monster immunities, which is a step forward, but it comes with its own set of issues. I think it's time for monster immunities to go away. So, what would be the alternative? Well, why not simply have monsters that are highly resistant to an element instead? That same Act 1 Fallen in Hell difficulty could have 75% resistance to fire instead. It would still make him challenging to kill, but no longer impossible. With enough skill and damage, you would succeed, and that, to me, is the entire point. On number 3, two major quality of life changes that people have been asking for a long time. First one is quite simple: more stash tabs. Diablo 2's itemization is complex. There are a lot of useful items, not just uniques but also runes, jewels, and even byte bases. All those things take lots of space, and space management is one of the more frustrating parts of playing any Diablo game. Devs should at the very least double the current amount of stash tabs to help with the item management. The second major quality of life change is item stacking, or more specifically, socket tables and consumables with same properties, mainly runes, gems, and potions. Listen, it's 2025, and this has been long overdue. With all the quality of life changes Diablo 2 Resurrected introduced, this one is also a no-brainer. We should have the ability to stack the same runes, potions, and gems on top of each other. I recommend a stack size of 50, but anything is better than what we have now. Imagine a world in which you don't have to make separate mules for all the runes that you collected along the way. Or, while leveling up your character, your inventory is not cluttered with potions. If it were up to me, I would extend potion stacking to belts as well, but I understand not everyone would want that. So a good compromise would be at least to allow it in the inventory and stash. It could look something like this. Of course, this picture is just for illustrative purposes, but you see what I mean. Number 4, Asset Refresh. Now, there are several things that I like to talk about in this section, so I named it Asset Refresh because it revolves around introducing new things and refreshing others that we already have. Diablo 2 introduced several new rune words, first time in over 16 years since last time that happened, and they were a huge success. From Bulwark, which is a nice defensive item in the early game, to Mosaic that completely shaked up the meta, and made the Assassin martial arts build, of all things, the most powerful in the game. And that's great! Game this old should have some new interesting things added to it every now and then to freshen up the experience. Still, it's important to do it in a way that feels true to the original game, and it seems that devs understand this philosophy. Not only did they introduce new rune words, they also freshened up some old ones. The ability to put insight into bows is great. It adds more value to Act 1 Mercenary, and it's exactly the kind of change I want to see. Hopefully, it doesn't stop there, and we keep getting more rune words to play with. Speaking of that, we shouldn't be afraid of new things. Why not new runes as well? We could introduce some new runes to the game that would have interesting new effects. What about a new high rune that gives faster cast rate? That's just one suggestion, and if you saw the thumbnail of this video, you know that I have some others, but I will say more about that in the next section. New runes would then enable new rune words as well. More options for players is generally always a good thing, so why not? Now let's talk about items. Some unique items in the game could definitely use more love. There are a lot of uniques, and it would take a long time for me to go over all of them that seem underperforming, though that could be a separate video in itself. Instead, I will focus on one specific class of uniques, Treasure Class 87. Treasure Class 87 items are the rarest of the rare, and in the base game, most monsters can't even drop these. Though with Terror Zones, that problem has been mostly resolved. Still, for items that are meant to be super rare, they're not particularly useful. At least most of them. Best example of this is Tyrael's Might, the rarest item in the game, even rarer than Zod. And if you ever get it, you're excited because it's so rare, but you're not really looking forward to use it. And that's a major issue. Items of that rarity should compete to be best in slot for most builds. Instead, they're often underwhelming. Griffin's Eye and Crown of Ages are good examples of how powerful these items should be. Tyrael's Might, not so much. I could go over every single of these items and offer suggestions on how to make them better, but it would take too much time. But speaking of Tyrael's Might, what if we, for example, slap +3 to all skills on Tyrael's? Suddenly, it's a lot better. Whatever they decide to do, I hope we get to see improvements on these items. And while we're talking about items, why not some new uniques as well? It's been a long time since that has happened too. Some new, interesting items that can compete with rune words. Maybe a caster shield that can compete with Spirit, but has a much lower strat requirement than Monarch. Just something to think about. Finally, what I would like to see is giving much needed attention to all the skills in the game that are underused or almost useless. I intend to make a separate video about that as well, but one such skill could be increased stamina that we already talked about. It sucks and needs improvement. What if, instead of stamina, it grants a strength bonus instead? It would help with both damage and gear requirements. Number 5 on things I would improve in the game is teleport. Diablo 2 is not a balanced game, and in this imbalance, one particular thing stands out more than anything else, and that is teleport. In a game where you strive to slay hordes of monsters as fast as possible, the ability to literally teleport through walls, obstacles, and opponents at great speed is obviously immensely powerful. Simply put, teleport is the most powerful and most broken ability in the entire game. Unlike in other Diablo games like Diablo 3 and Diablo 4, where other classes have movement skills of similar strength and utility, in Diablo 2, teleport has no real competition. It is no surprise then that after every ladder reset, you make a sorceress first and other characters later. And also another thing that is no surprise is the fact that the only item in the game able to give other characters the ability to teleport permanently, which is of course Enigma, is the most valuable and highly coveted item in the game. Because it is so good, Enigma is the endgame item for most builds in the game. Some builds can go without it, but it's not ideal. For others, like say the Summonmancer, the build literally doesn't work without Enigma. If you want to teleport but you're not a sorceress, however, your options are limited. You can either use an item with telecharges, which takes up a slot out of your call to arms, and it also has to be repaired, or you can use Enigma. But Enigma does not come cheap. Should you choose to make it yourself, you need 2 high runes. There are no guarantees you will ever get them, and if you want to buy them, it will cost you a lot. And in case you're picking up a pattern here, yes, 2 high runes that make up Enigma are the most valuable ones. So, the answer to this problem is to allow more ways for other classes to obtain teleport. I propose 2 separate, concurring solutions. Number 1. A new rune word with teleport in the helm slot. By giving another rune word the teleport ability and putting it in the helm, we are doing several things. We are enabling more build diversity and more options by allowing players to use items they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. This change alone would open up the gameplay so much and make things fresh. And by using a rune word that does not have bear or jaw, we are also promoting the value of other high runes in the game. A win-win. Number 2. Remember the new runes that I was talking about earlier? Now, you might think I'm mad for what I'm about to propose, but there is a method to my madness, so hear me out. I propose 2 new runes. As you can see on the thumbnail, the name and art doesn't really matter. This is just a suggestion. So rune number 1 would give any item you put it in 50 teleport charges. That rune would be a low rune between Tal and Ral in rune rarity, with a required level of 18. Why 18? Because that is also when teleport becomes available to the sorcerers. The idea behind this rune is to provide a reliable and predictable way to teleport for low-level characters in the early game. You could farm it as easily as Act 1 Countess and it would be a tremendous upgrade in terms of mobility for any class. The current alternative to this is to try and find a staff teleport in Ormus in F3 of normal. This would get online much quicker than that. Rune number 2 would be a high rune with 500 teleport charges. This will be the endgame rune similar to Charm in terms of rarity. The idea behind the second rune is to serve as an alternative to relying on the rune word for teleport for high-end characters. Something that you can use to complete, let's say, Chaos Sanctuary run or a Bale run before going back to town to repair. You could, for example, socket it inside of a unique helm or a weapon and still have similar mobility to Enigma. Of course, the major drawback to that would be the ridiculous amount of gold 500 charges or teleport would take to repair. So I would also propose a 70% reduction in charge repair cost. Durability repair can remain the same. And finally, we come to my last point, which is the endgame. Let's face it, Diablo 2 never really had a proper endgame. Or, in other words, the only true endgame in Diablo 2 is the hunt for items, which is great for a while, but it does get stale. At least for me. Spending hundreds of hours in hope of getting an item for your Holy Grail run just doesn't appeal to me. It never has, and I'm an old school player of the game. I would like to have more challenges to aspire to, more zones to farm and monsters to slay. Remember what I said earlier that we shouldn't be afraid of new things? Diablo 2 concept art is some of the best I've ever seen, but there are also other assets that just didn't make the final cut in the game, and some of them are actually super cool. For example, Dark Guard, a demonic knight sort of monster similar to Black Knights from Diablo 1. Some of the proposed variants included Blood Knight and Dark Paladin. How cool is that? For reasons unknown, they were ultimately scrapped from the game, though you can see their statues in River of Flame. Or maybe these elemental demons, elemental creatures that deal either fire, cold, lightning, or poison damage. They do look rather goofy here, but if they were introduced to the game, I'm sure that they would have been more refined. And did you know that all the codes from the Butcher can be found in Diablo 2 as well? It was clearly planned for Diablo 2, but for some reason that idea was scrapped as well. My point is that there is so much nice content that could have been in the game, so why not reintroduce some of the cooler ones? They could be a part of new zones that will offer new unique rewards. The possibilities are only limited by imagination. I would also be remiss regarding the cut content if I didn't at least mention the guilds. Did you know that Diablo 2 was originally meant to have the guild system? There was a strong sense of community in Diablo 2. Whether it was trading, chatting in different game channels, or farming in a party. The multiplayer aspect has always been one of the most important features in online play, but originally, Blizzard planned to do much more. There are files in the original game that show menus for creating guild emblems, displaying items for guild members, and even entire clan halls. The menus and guild halls were almost complete, which likely means that scrapping the guilds was a last-minute decision, which is a shame. But what do you think? What endgame element would you add to the game? Do you think Diablo 2 even needs any? Let me know in the comments. And with that, we have reached the end of the video. Those are my top 6 things that Diablo 2 needs to address to be an even better game. Diablo 2 is a quintessential ARPG, of course, the most influential title of the genre of all time, but it can always be better. So why shouldn't we aspire to improve it? Let me know what you think about my proposed changes. Do you agree or disagree? Let's have a conversation as long as it's respectful. If you made it till the end of the video, first of all, thank you. Also, these videos take a long time to make, so please consider subscribing. It's a free way to support me, and it means a lot to a small channel like mine. Anyway, thank you for watching. My name is Fallen Messiah, and I'll see you in the next one.